Hey, folks, welcome back to the Dennis Miller Show. Joining us now, a good friend of the show. We've talked to Doug many times over the years, always about interesting matters au cinéma. Doug Brody is the co-author of a new book called Star Power. I'm out of the loop on this one. Doug, welcome back to the show.
It's wonderful to be back with you. I hear your voice every day, every weekday. It's great hearing you speaking directly to me again.
Well, Dougie, I'm not hip to this book. The interview came about rather quickly. Flesh it out for me, as you always do, in your inimitable manner.
Yeah, sure. Well, about 12 years ago now, I got a phone call from out of the blue from a fellow named Jim Whalen. Now, as I found out, Jim was a very successful self-help guru, doing speaking engagements, talking to people about both professional and personal self-help. What he realized is that the most successful people in that career have books that they either sell and autograph at those sessions or that can be purchased in bookstores or over Amazon or whatever. And also, it's not just enough to have a book where you say the same thing that everybody else says. You've got to have something unique and different to say and a unique way of saying it. Remember that old line from the play Gypsy about strippers? You got to have a gimmick if you want to get ahead. You got to have a slightly different take on it. And maybe the most successful ever was Chicken Soup for the Soul. And Jim Whalen came up with his own idea, and we might actually describe it as, we couldn't legally use this term in the book because it's copyrighted, but Chicken Soup for the Movie Lover's Soul. The idea being that everybody, including those people who are seeking self-help professionally or personally, love movies, whether it's the most recent ones, classics, whatever. And most of us go to the movies mainly for fun. But as I said back in 1975 in one of my earliest books, movies don't have to be a means of escaping life. They can be a way of comprehending it and understanding it better. Well, Jim wanted a movie historian to work with him on the book. He went to various libraries, read one person after another, decided that the way I write is accessible to the general public rather than in some sort of academies, which I can't stand and he can't stand. I like to take, complicated ideas and put them in simple terms. You and I and everybody else has picked up a book, where the words sound so big and it makes you feel dumb. And as you know, I try to write exactly the opposite of that. I want to communicate with people. And so anyway, Jim called me and said, would you like to work with me on this book? What we'll do is we'll go through a series of approaches towards self-help personally and professionally, but in each case what we'll do, the subtitle of the book is basically How to Star in, Direct, Produce, and Write Your Own Life. And basically it's the idea of treating your life as a movie or a mini-series, let's say, and looking at each step along the way and saying, I don't have to sit here passively. I can do it actively. Now, other books have said that, but where do you get your best examples to do that? Well, Jim's idea, and he provided the outline of the book, and I provided most of the examples, was to go to one great movie, movies that you don't have to go out and seek and see. You've already seen them. Your favorites, Raiders of the Lost Ark or Pretty Woman or wherever it is, and look at them from a different angle, rather than just as entertainment. They certainly are that, but look at them as something you can learn from.
Wow, what an interesting... What a great idea on his part, and I do think he picked the right guy, because I know sometimes when I read about films, I literally have to put the appraisal of the film down, be it like Pauline Kael or somebody in the past, and just go, I can't follow this. I could follow the movie, but I can't follow this. So I like the accessible thing. Aren't you really just reversing Aristotle's thing, though, the old adage?
You said it. I hadn't thought of it in quite those terms, but you said it. What did Aristotle say?
Art imitates
life, right? And what I'm saying here, what Jim and I are saying here in this book from Sunbury Press, is that life very often imitates art, and it does that, and it can get you in trouble, or it can be very, very effective thing. I remember a little movie that Marlo Thomas and Alan Alda made 30 years ago or more. I'm trying to think of the name of it, but in it, Marlo Thomas is like a young girl. She hasn't met Alan Alda yet, and she's at a drive-in movie theater with a guy kissing him, and A Place in the Sun with Montgomery Clift and Elizabeth Taylor is playing on the screen. Remember that wonderful scene where they kiss for the first time?
Sure.
Anybody who hasn't seen it, you got to see it. It's just a great
Extreme
scene.
close-ups,
But Marlo Thomas turns to the guy with her in the car and says, "You know, you look a little bit like Montgomery Clift." And as they kiss, it's shot in exactly the style of the scene in the old Montgomery Clift George Stevens movie. And then the next shot, Marlo Thomas is walking around pregnant. Now, that's kind of a warning. You know, it can be dangerous to imitate movies unless you're consciously aware that you're doing so. And I see it all the time. As a college professor, I remember back around 1991, I was walking through the hall of a college where I was teaching, and there were a young group of 4 young women sitting together. The show Friends had just gone on the air, and they were having a discussion, and one says, "Okay, now you can be our Rachel." Okay, you got to go get your hair cut like her, and oh, you're funny. You can be our Phoebe. And the way in which we always tend to use role models in films or TV shows, we model ourselves on what they wear, what they do. Well, our advice from Jim Whalen and myself is take control of it. Don't let it take control of you. Really look at Raiders of the Lost Ark and see, you know, there's that wonderful gag in that film where Indy is facing off this big guy, you know, with the sword and everything and wants to fight him, and Indy pulls out his gun and shoots the guy. You know, it's one of the greatest gags ever. It's actually lifted from an earlier B movie called Seven. But we'll give Spielberg credit for it. But the thing is, we all laughed at that scene. You can actually learn something from that because there's always a simple solution. I think that's one of the reasons so many people love President Reagan, because President Carter, however brilliant he was, a man, he would see the complexity of the issues and very often not be able to move. He couldn't see simple solutions. Other people say there's always a simple solution. You simply have to find it. I remember when President Johnson was being taken down by the Vietnam War. He had so many wonderful programs in so many ways, but the Vietnam War was destroying him. He couldn't figure out what to do. Nixon comes in, you know what he does? He ends the draft. All the protests ended immediately. Kids weren't going to protest if they were no longer scared about getting drafted. We can learn whether it's from the news, whether it's from movies, TV, you know, things that we just take as, well, that's just the news, and that's the president's, or this is, you know, Julia Roberts in a film. If you look at them from a different angle, and the whole book is teaching people how to find that angle and say, wow, I get what you mean. There's always a solution to the problem, and the great movie characters are the ones who find that solution and make it work for them.
We're talking to Doug Brody, and the film is Star Power. He has a co-author, Jim Whalen. It sounds like an interesting approach to somehow, well, listen, I think we've all have found catharsis in movies and emotional connection in movies, but this almost seems more like some sort of tactical approach, the ability to gain knowledge from movies and use it in your own life. Or do you focus more on people's personal lives or professional lives?
Well, we try our best in the book to balance precisely that, so that if you're someone who needs, like, professional help, looking at somebody who, I don't know, I'm going way back now. Most people don't even remember this film. It just came to mind. But remember George C. Scott in the hospital? Where George C. Scott, follow up to Patton, where he's dealing with he's the head of a hospital. Patty Chayefsky wrote it. And he's dealing with one problem after another. But, as we sit there watching the film, they seem insurmountable. How could anybody handle that? The genius of the way Chayefsky wrote it is that the George C. Scott character will not let circumstances get the best of him. And he takes each problem, and on screen as the movie unfolds for 96 minutes, he sits there and solves them. And the whole idea is, if he can do it in his seemingly unresolvable professional life, you can do it. Or looking at Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman. There's a wonderful arc to that character. She is so oblivious at the beginning of the film, the basically the street hooker she's playing. But by the midpoint of the movie, and we actually analyze movies in terms of story structure and stuff, and say, if a writer working with a director, can do that to a scripted character, you can do it to a degree with your life. In real life, there's always things, the bus turns the corner and you don't see it coming. There are those things that happen in life that don't necessarily happen in movies. In certain great films like Inception, those random things do happen because they imitate life that more closely. But the idea is, what's that wonderful line from Alcoholics Anonymous? I can't even remember it now, but it's like, let me seize control of the things I can control and understand the things that I can't control, and let me have the wisdom to see the difference between the two. And Jim Whalen and I in the book always say, there's going to be some things you can't control. But again, to look at another great film, Terms of Endearment. Remember that Oscar-winning classic with Shirley MacLaine, and the idea of another one of those films that really follow real life in a certain pattern, because the first half of that film seems like a wonderful TV sitcom about a mother and daughter and the mother's love affairs, like with the Jack Nicholson character. But in the middle of the movie, it's announced that the girl has cancer. And they say, it'll be okay. And, of course, it's a movie. We assume it's going to be. But it isn't. It gets worse and worse. And it was one of those rare films that actually makes the changeover from comedy to serious drama and makes it work. So on the level of aesthetics, it's a great film, but also how we can learn from looking at that film to deal with those kind of coming out of nowhere problems. We may not be able to solve them in that movie. I don't mean to give the ending away, but they aren't able to save the young girl's life. But the way in which the mother guides her daughter through that, the way in which she grows from the experience, the way in which she's able to handle other things in her life, including the men in her life, having been through that idea of how when you look at the great movies, almost always, not always, but almost always, there's a dynamic quality to the great characters. We watch them grow as people from beginning to end of the movie, and the thing is, it's all through the way they handle experiences. And we try looking at those movies, the great ones, the ones people love, to show that you can absorb it, you can learn from them, and there's a degree to which you can apply it to your life and make your life work out. Not perfect. First thing we say is, life abhors perfection the way nature abhors the vacuum, but you can make it better, and that's what we try to help people do.
If your inner writer is clever. Up next, more with Doug Brody, our good friend, about his latest book. This is a bit of a deviation from some of his other books. This one called Star Power, Creating Success Hollywood Style, sort of gleaming magic moments, resonating moments in famous films, and applying some of them to your journey through life. This is the Dennis Miller Show. Welcome back to the Dennis Miller Show. Still with us is Doug Brody, who is the co-author of a new book called Star Power, along with his friend, self-help guru Jim Whalen. I happen to find old movies much wiser. Black and white, old movies, pre-1958, preferably 40s to 50s. You seem to cite some films, more modern films. Would you say the preponderance of films in the book considered are older or newer?
I'd say basically what we do is that with, recent films, they're all in there. Spielberg films, Lucas films. We borrow on Star Wars. We borrow on the big epics as well. Just because they're set in fantasy settings don't mean that they don't deal with life. I mean, there's a famous line, Obi-Wan Kenobi saying to Luke, "Don't think, Luke, feel." And we analyze what that means and how, you can surrender to the Force. To me, the greatness of the film was Lucas's, I did a couple of books on Star Wars a few years ago. I was talking with you on the show about it. We analyzed, the second trilogy or the prequel trilogy to look at what Anakin does wrong. His inability to see his place in the universe, and how you can avoid making the mistakes that he makes.
Hayden, by the way, I just have to intercede for a second, Doug. 1 second. Hayden Christensen's performance made me doubt the existence of God. Anyway, back to you.
Of course. And so with the old films, we tend to use the ones that not just, hardcore movie lovers, but everybody knows. Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz, King Kong, the original. We use a lot of the absolute classics that pretty much everybody who cares at all about movies has seen. And there are many excellent films that came out in 1935 that may have won the Oscar that everybody's forgotten about. Maybe wrongly. But we don't get into that too much because it's for the general public, not just for a very small coterie of movie lovers. And the more recent you get with films, the more we're able to assume pretty much everybody, Avatar or something. Pretty much everybody has seen it. Whatever
accessible.
And, what is Avatar actually saying about, despite its fantasy setting, futuristic or whatever faraway setting, or for that matter, The Wizard of Oz. The idea of Dorothy's dynamic arc in that story, or the main characters in Avatar, where he learns that everything he thought he believed he doesn't. Dorothy realizing that the only way she's going to get home is if she takes matters into her own hands. Scarlett O'Hara, and the way she handles problems or fails to handle them.
Well, it would sound to me then that I just have to intercede because we're up against it, but it sounds to me that self-determinism throughout film history might be something good to practice in your own life. Doug's website is dougbrody.com.
You also have one that is www.starpowerbook.com.
All right, Doug, we appreciate your time. Who's your next particular star you're going to focus on in your next book?
My next book up, I hope I can talk to you in December. I've got a book coming out called Everything I Need to Know I Learned from Watching John Wayne Movies.
You're going in harm's way. I'll be there with you. Take care, Doug.
Wait.
Hey, folks, welcome back to the Dennis Miller Show. And what's happening? A lot of dates coming up. Ramping it up for the summer. Brother Love's Travel and Salvation Show. Carvey and I are going out. We'll be in Washington, D.C. on July 12th and Hollywood, Florida on July 13th. As I've said before, at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., and in a gambling casino on July 13th. And I would say the first one, infinitely more vice. For more information, go to DennisMillerRadio.com and click on Dennis Live. Let's see, we're taking your phone calls. It's a mini Mackinac for the new listeners or new cities that we pick up. Mini Mackinac and Mackinac. Mackinac is a 1 hour of phone calls, anything your little heart desires. No topic is out of bounds. And Mini Mackinac, well, we got a little time left in the segment. I'm trying to make a cute play on words. So that's all. So anything you want to talk about at 866-509-RANT, 866-509-7268. And these are the same numbers that you can leave us a voicemail at. While you queue up, once again, 866-509-7268, I might as well play a couple voicemails. Linda in Chicago, voicemail number 2.
Just to rant a little about the whining thing. Yeah, the whining thing I see as part of that whole either exploit this way or exploit that way, and whining is one way to exploit. There's a lot of people who are out to get someone to do something for them. Like the exploited have become the exploiter. That's their M.O. I'm sure you know that, but just in case.
Well, thank you for venting, Linda, and I do believe that's to be true. I think in the past, if you'd told your child who went off to college, to the Culinary Institute, to major in whining, you might have meant that they should become a sommelier. But nowadays, I would say there's great hay to be made in whining, because not only does the squeaky wheel get the oil now, we even refuse to go for our own oil. Thank God some people, because I'm shocked at how in the pocket of the more strident members of the Green community this president is with this Keystone Pipeline. Thank God there's a bunch of people out there who are drilling on private lands and don't have to ask for government. But, how long before somebody's well is capped by a desert tortoise? That can certainly be coming They're just airdropping in desert tortoises like they used to do with pamphlets in Nam, just shutting down commerce all across. How much money could he be getting from green considerations that President Barack Obama would risk alienating that toad Rich Trumka and the union guys? I mean, it must be an unbelievable check that they're writing to them. But I agree that whining is the new way. Let's see. 866-509-7268 if you want to jump in. 866-509-RANT. And here's Steve in Missouri. I'm starting to notice more calls like this that are reluctantly acquiescent to what I've been pitching for a while, but I don't pitch it because it brings me any joy, folks. I'm trying to keep you appraised. As I said, I think of myself now as a real-time archaeologist. I'm just noting the ciphers. Cheryl in California, where is it? Steve in Missouri, number 7.
You know, we look at what our country's going with and where it's headed, and it's ridiculous. We all agree. But like your last caller said, the Canadians are looking down at us, and a lot of Americans scratching their head and they don't want to get involved. Well, we're losing our country. Remember the movie Helen of Troy? Well, the big wooden horse is Obama. He got in somehow, and everybody's on the take, 50% of the country, so we'll keep them voted in as long as they get a check from the government. But that wooden horse is causing our demise, and it's unfortunate that a lot of us, 86% of us, don't realize that or don't care. It's really disgusting. I mean, especially the voters not voting and taking that opportunity to vote.
It's only disgusting if you're disgusted by it. I would tell you to think of Jan Michael Vincent holding the sand buckets in the great film Tribes, while Darren McGavin screams right in his ear. Think of the look on Jan Michael Vincent's face as he holds those sand buckets. Shoot for that. That's where you want to go, to that look, and to that inner sense of peace. Don't let these creeps in. They're grifters. They don't deserve to be that far in. Shrug a little and stay out of the way right now because they're vile. History will correct this. All right, we're going to take a break, come back. We'll do some more phone calls. Some more voicemails. That's predicated on you. 866-509-7268. This is the Dennis Miller Show.
The Lord is waiting to take your hand. Shout hallelujah. Come on, get happy. We're going to be going to the promised land.
Do not watch any political shows this weekend. It's the first step. Don't give them your weekends. If you can't get out of it during the week, I guess you can't get out of it, but you should fight to get out of it. But definitely take the weekends off. Don't watch this crap about politicians. They're jerks, they're grifters, and they aren't half as smart as you are. Don't give them your weekends, for God's sakes. Joining us now is Todd Tarbox, who is the author of Orson Welles and Roger Hill, A Friendship in 3X. How you doing, Todd?
Wonderful. Delighted to be with you.
I've read Simon Callow's books, and I've listened to the Bogdanovich interviews. I'm a Wells fan. I've seen Rogers turn up, obviously, in the books. Can you explain to our listeners the friendship between Orson Welles and Roger?
Yeah, Roger Hill was Orson's headmaster at Todd School, the only schooling that Welles had or really needed. From age 11 through age 15 when he graduated. The Todd School in those days just went through the 10th grade. And during those formative years, they developed a very warm relationship which sustained them for the rest of Orson's life, really. From a teacher to a mentor to a dear friend. And I think it's one of the few relationships that Orson maintained throughout his life. And it was a mutual affection and respect.
Yeah, he was such a savant in many ways that it almost seemed difficult for Welles to concede avuncular status to anybody else.
That's true. That's true, and that was one of the unique, I think, points in this relationship. Is this was that one unique individual.
We're talking to Todd Tarbox. He has written a play, author of Orson Welles and Roger Hill, A Friendship in 3 Acts, a book as a play. Tell us about the decision to write the book as a play.
Well, there's an intimacy to a play, and it avoids my interference in large part. And they were also an homage to both of them, their enthusiasm for the theater. And I think that it's sort of there's a drama to Orson's life that unfolds, which is sort of compelling and poignant, and all those elements together made it appropriate. And also, it's the first experience I know of, and I've read a lot of books on Welles, that his private voice comes out for the first time. It turns out he's a very warm, as well as brilliant and witty fellow, but there's a warmth that I've never read anywhere else that is in this book.
How long did they end up over the course of their lives? How many years did they remain friends?
Throughout Orson's life, as a matter of fact, the last evening of Orson's life, they had a long conversation, which is in this book. So it was very almost life sustaining for Orson. It was not just a mentor, but it was a father figure. As you know, his father died when Orson was 15, and his mother died years before when he was 9. And not only my grandfather, but my grandmother, Hortense Hill, sort of functioned for decades as a foster parents.
I guess they must have shared, i.e., the theater for certain, but I guess they had a bunch of mutual interests and enthusiasm.
Literature, theater, particularly Shakespeare and the Bible. Matter of fact, when Orson was still in his teens, he and my grandfather, co-created a series of Shakespeare plays adapted for high school performances, and Everybody's Shakespeare. So that was one of their early efforts. Before that, they worked on a play together that was marching song, which was produced in Woodstock, but I'm hoping to get that printed. I think because that's another element that's in this book. Is throughout there are flashbacks, and I use a lot of Orson's writing. From the time he was 10 years old, his writing was just phenomenal, insightful and charming, and just a remarkable character. And so that's his. I think one of the elements that I think a lot of people aren't aware of is one of his enormous talents, which is underrated, is his ability to write. Mm-hmm. One day, someone should put together a book of his writings. If someone doesn't, I'm tempted, because it's remarkable how fluid he was in the printed word.
We're talking to Todd Tarbox. He is the author of Orson Welles and Roger Hill, A Friendship in 3 Acts. Roger Hill is Todd's grandfather. We talked about Welles's father passing, I believe, in the early 30s, if not 1930. And at that point, I believe he asked your grandfather to become his legal guardian, and your grandfather demurs, right?
Yeah, he was, because there's a fellow by the name of Maurice Bernstein, who for years, when Orson was just an infant, entered the Welles family. And my grandfather felt it would be sort of devastate Maurice if Orson selected my grandfather. So he convinced Orson to, and also I think all of the financial they wanted to maintain a friendship. I think my grandfather, he didn't want to get involved with finances, but I think basically it had to do with not wanting to upset Bernstein.
Well, certainly he paid homage throughout the film. Yeah. Citizen Kane went to his avuncular friend. You hear Mr. Bernstein, Mr. Exactly. Bernstein in Sicily. It's like a New York Times style book note where he always has to refer to him as Mr. Bernstein. How early on, you're talking about Welles's writing, does he have any sort of obsession, or does he show some sort of overripe interest in death, even as an early man in his writing.
Yeah. When he was a preteen, he was putting on productions that dealt with that subject at the Todd School. Yes, death held a fascination for him, and there's one of the wonderful chapters in this book is a reflection on death. And it was also in that particular section is a marvelous ability they both had to almost finish one another's sentences. That they'll quote Shakespeare, they'll quote the Bible, and it's remarkable. And not only that, but the catholicity of their interests. For instance, in the particular chapter where they go at some length on death, earlier in that discussion, they talk about a marvelous sort of experience at New Year's with contretemps, a family contretemps happening on Times Square. So they range from the almost frivolous to the profound in each of the acts, as well as throughout the book. It's quite a tour de force. And I can say this immodestly because I did a good deal of editing and cleaning, but it's basically you're hearing both of these remarkable characters relating to one another.
Isn't it interesting that guys who so often seem to have some sort of fascination with death almost approach their life like they'll live forever? Anything I've read about Wells, it would seem sleep be damned, dietary guidance be damned.
That's a good point. It's very ironic, isn't it?
It's just almost, I remember when Hausman used to present the facts of things to him, he would almost damn Hausman and say, you're not thinking big enough, and we've got to go completely for it. So some guys who, I guess they're one Tumblr click away from obsessing about death, they seem to run from it by living very large. We're talking to Todd Tarbox. He's written a book. It's in the form of a play. Orson Welles and Roger Hill, his grandfather, a friendship in 3 acts. And what would you like to, I don't know, let me ask you this. Were you ever jealous of Welles and your grandfather as far as you and your grandfather, or was he have plenty of space for both of you?
Welles, I rarely met the man. I mean, he was sort of a figure in the family. My grandparents, of course, remained throughout their life, and Wells's life, very much implicated in his. But he was a character, and a bigger than life in every sense of the word character. And I would rejoice in his successes and sort of sorrow for the disappointments in his life.
What would you like the readers of the book, the book, to take away from it there, Todd?
Well, not only enjoying these 2 fascinating characters and what their take on life, but there's a subtle hope that people will have a greater appreciation and the importance of friends in their lives.
We've been talking to Todd Tarbox, and once again, the author of Orson Welles and Roger Hill, A Friendship in 3 Acts. Todd, we appreciate your time. I'm going to give this a tumble.
I appreciate yours.
All right, my friend. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Todd Tarbox. Yeah, I've read a lot about Welles, and it seems like he was almost disdainful of any sort of advice, especially from an not elderly, but anybody older than he. He seemed to bridle at it and fancy himself quite the enfant terrible. But I do know that Mr. Hills turns up as somebody he did defer to. And I guess everybody needs somebody out there on the perimeter line, or they'll go absolutely bats. If you don't have anybody, I think that'll cave. I think then you're Elvis with the Memphis Mafia, and that can go badly rather quickly. All right, once again, the book is Orson Welles and Roger Hill, A Friendship in 3 Acts. And we'll have to give it a read. Like Todd said, he wasn't being arrogant there. He was saying he almost reported their conversations back and forth, which he'd done a lot of research on, polished it up and put it in the form of a play. All right, The Dennis Miller Show.